Hi, I'm Jim Hewling, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you to this episode of Execution Insights. Now, I'm recording this as we begin a new year, and I just have to say, a lot of the leaders I'm working with right now are going through what I would call a real interruption. Not the kind of change you choose, by the way, the kind that just shows up and starts rearranging your life without asking your permission, that kind of change. Now, for some people, that looks like a career that used to fit and suddenly it doesn't. And for a few others, it's a relationship or some personal aspect that has shifted. But for many, it's quieter. It's like a slow loss of confidence that makes you start wondering if you were even as good a leader as you once thought you were. It undermines the very foundation from which you led. Well, if any of those kinds of interruptions are happening to you, I just want you to know you're not alone. And when I hear about interruptions from people, it always brings me back to an old proverb that's been hanging over my desk for as long as I can remember. Now, I don't use the proverb to explain what's happening to you or to me or to anyone else. I just let it sit there for the wisdom it has always offered. The proverb is simply this: no path goes all the way. No, I get it. If you're in the middle of something falling apart or changing underneath you right now, that's not a really comforting thing to think about. And it hasn't always sounded that way for me either, but I want you to hear it again in just the way I mean it. No path goes all the way. You see, if only we knew that, if only we accepted that from the beginning, then when the interruptions come, welcome or unwelcome, expected or unexpected, we would have a different mindset as we encountered them. But when you're living through the disruption, you don't see the meaning. All you have at that moment is questions and doubt and that feeling of, gosh, what's happening to my life? And in my own life, when I've had a disruption, I would say the same thing. I didn't understand any of it at the time it was happening. I only have the perspective I have today, as a matter of fact, because I can see it looking back. In fact, a part of my story is simply this. In my 10th year as a CEO, which was a role I had worked toward more than 2 decades, I found myself in a place I never saw coming. From the outside, everything looked good. I had a great job and people trusted me. And on paper, all the metrics and the things about the company looked very, very solid. What was shifting was something inside. Now, it wasn't dramatic, and I don't have a story that includes a big blow up. I just had a growing awareness that the joy I used to feel in coming to this job every day was fading. And I remember thinking, this is so strange. I worked so long and so hard to get to this place. And yet I was really stuck in a place that a lot of leaders would say they know well. That place where you have too much invested to walk away and you don't have quite enough left to make you think you're going to stay. That place of decision. Now, in my story, around that same time, I got invited to speak at a big leadership development conference. And there's a part of the story that still makes me smile to this day, because guess what they asked me to speak about? Wholehearted leadership. Can you believe that? I want to tell you that the irony of that was not lost on me, even for a moment. But I accepted the invitation. And as I started preparing for the talk, something unexpected started to happen to me. Every time I would work on the message, instead of feeling drained, I felt energized. I wasn't thinking about performance measures or metrics or success. I was trying to go deeper in this message. And I was reflecting on what my own journey really had taught me about leadership, and about courage and character and belief and growth, all the things that I was passionate about. But here's the key. Every page of notes that I wrote felt like it was giving me energy back. And by the time the message was developed and I walked onto that stage, I could literally feel it. I was buzzing with that message. And of course, that message on that day was different than any other message I had ever given. Now, it wasn't because of the applause. There was some applause, and I was glad to hear it. But it wasn't because of that. And it wasn't because of the response afterward, even though people were very kind to me after the speech. It was because I could see it while I was in the room. People weren't just listening, they were nodding, they were smiling, they were recognizing something. It was as though we were having, the audience and I, a very intimate conversation about something that was true, that we both knew, even if before that moment we'd never met or named it before. So right there, I want you to picture this, in the middle of that talk for 1,000 people in the audience, something clicked for me. It wasn't dramatic, nothing, no big moment happened. If you'd been sitting in the audience, you wouldn't have been able to tell that something had just happened. It was quiet. But a realization took hold in my mind that changed everything. Because I realized that my time as a CEO had not ended in failure, had not ended as a mistake. It just wasn't where the path ended. You see, the whole time, a decade that I was CEO, it had actually been preparing me for the next thing I would do. And that shift in my mindset literally changed everything. In fact, on the whole flight home, which was across the country, it was a long flight, I had a chance to just sit with this realization and let it sort of do its work on me in my mind. And as the noise and the excitement all settled, an even greater realization came forward. What I had loved most about being a CEO, if the truth was being told, was never the title, and it was never the day-to-day responsibility of the job. It was what the role allowed me to do. You see, as a CEO, I had the latitude to spend a lot of time developing leaders. I had a chance to help people grow into their own strengths and watch them mature and thrive. I had a chance to show them how to help other people rise around them. And as honest as I know how to be with you listening to this message today, those were all signs that that season was ending, which was exciting, but it was also terrifying. Because once I admitted that I was being called to leave the role of CEO and move into a time of preparing CEOs, then all the questions started to come hard and fast. I mean, I wondered if I could really pull it off. Could I really follow this calling? Could I step into something new at this stage in my life? And I don't kid you when I say I was thinking hard about whether or not I was willing to be a beginner again. You know what that means? Learning new skills and living with real uncertainty, both professional and economic, and taking those awkward first steps. You know what I'm talking about? Where you don't really know what you're doing yet. You're just trying to figure it all out. I didn't know if I was fully prepared for that. But as we approached the city of Atlanta, where I lived, the pilot came on and said that he wanted to prepare us for the landing. And in that moment, I realized he was talking to me, that I was the one preparing for a landing. And it all came down to this one simple question I had to answer. Is the life I'm being called into worth the discomfort it's going to take to get there? And by the time that plane touched down, I knew for sure that the answer to that question was yes. There was no holding on to the last chapter. There was no passionate prayer to get another year out of the old identity. It was time. The season had ended, and I was being called to something new and something that I could already feel an excitement about. Now, I don't know any better way to say this, but I'm telling you that a different version of me stepped off that plane that day. And the version that stepped off that plane was somebody who was willing to leave behind a role that was familiar and comfortable, not because it was wrong, but because that chapter was complete. because I remembered the sign on my office wall that says, no path goes all the way. Change is going to be inevitable. So some things, we do for a reason because we have a compelling cause that we're after, or some things like my time as a CEO, we do for a season. It's a period when we're supposed to be doing it. And for a very few things in life, we get to do for a lifetime. But here's what I've come to believe. And it's what I see over and over again now in the hundreds of leaders I have coached. Interruptions are not signs that you have failed. More often, they are simply invitations to finish one chapter and begin another. And remember, we don't begin again because it's easy. In fact, gosh, it's not easy, right? It's rarely easy. We begin again because something deeper is calling us forward. Some part of us is saying it's time to move into the next chapter. And in moments like this, I promise you, it isn't experience or competence that carries you through. Those are great assets, but that's not what makes the difference. What makes the difference is the willingness for you and for me to simply begin again. So, as we start this new year together, if the life you thought you were building has been interrupted, the one thing I know for sure is to stay open. The through line of your life will show itself, usually only in hindsight. And when it does, you may discover, just like I did, that even if the change was unexpected, everything up to this point was quietly preparing you for the work you are now ready to do next. In every sense of meaning of these words, you are stronger than you know, and your life and your path has perfectly prepared you for what is coming next. So I'll finish this episode with Execution Insights by leaving you with this one question, and I hope you'll stay with it in the minutes to come. What if the interruption you're experiencing now isn't an ending? What if it isn't the ending of your path? What if it's the marking of your completion of that path, so that the next great chapter of your life can begin? If you hold that mindset, I promise you, it will guide you into the next chapter and into a period in which the rewards and the joy and the impact would not have been imaginable in any role before it. I'm Jim Healing, and this is Execution Insights. It's been so great to have you here today. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.